guys, welcome back to Plots and Pots, of course, where we dig up all the dirt. For today's episode, we are heading north, and I mean way north. So we are out of North Carolina for this episode, and we are up. I think it's the shores, yeah, the shores of Lake Michigan to a stretch of sand and water that's called Indiana Dunes. And in this story, it was the summer of 1966, literally 60 years to the day that this post that three young women went there for an afternoon at the beach and they never came home. And we still fully don't know why. So, before we get into the case, let's talk about what's happening here at Triple H at the Homestead. The state of North Carolina, is in a pretty severe drought. And the one thing that we can be certain of is that when we're in a drought, the pond starts receding and the water primrose, I call it creeping primrose, it definitely starts to take hold. So when the pond drops like this, it doesn't just shrink. I mean, it does, but it helps expose stuff. And basically, it just exposes the roots, the rocks, and all the things that have either blown in or have been dislodged by the fish. And it just kind of settles into like this muck that we have sitting here. So this stuff, the floating primrose, it always creeps in, and we fight it yearly. Honestly, we didn't do anything with it last year, but we're not talking about that. But for us, it's not a native plant. It's pretty invasive and it spreads fast, and it can double in size in a matter of weeks, as you can see by the shoreline right here. But it travels in fragments, so you just have to rip it out by the handful, and you can literally walk away. And if you miss one itty bitty piece, it will root in and it will start somewhere new. It's pretty, and it has like these green leaves, red stems, and it has like yellow flowers. I mean, it is pretty, but if you leave it alone and let it do its thing, it forms a dense mat. And with that mat, it starts shading out everything underneath, and it chokes out the pond, from the outside in or from the inside out. I don't know, but anyway, it starts messing with everything. It's the kind of thing that looks like it's just sitting there quietly on the edge, all pretty and stuff, until you realize that it's actually spread further than you thought, and getting rid of it is completely going to take more than one weekend. And quite frankly, it's too hot to be out here longer than we need to be. I believe right now the humidity is at 94%, and we are out here while filming this, and it is 8 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, so we're only going to spend a few hours out here. So while hubby is doing this, I am going to go work in the garden bed. I've got some weeds that have popped up around the pumpkins, so I'm just going to start weeding those out with the hula hoe or the stirrup hoe, however you want to call it, because I know as soon as these vines take off, it's not going to matter if there's weeds or grass growing up through it or not, because I've got a lot of vines growing out here, but we'll see. Here's the other thing. I'm not planting any plants this week. We've got quite a few that are ready to go in the ground. I'll put up a picture right here, but right now they're kind of chilling out in the kiddie pool, and they're being watered every few days, every couple of days, or right now every day, literally. But we've got a triple-digit heat wave rolling in, and I really don't feel like putting new plants in the ground and then having to baby them during this heat wave. So I'm just going to skip it. Now, talked about what we're doing, so let's get into the story. In July, all right, my apologies if you can hear the lawnmower in the background, but my dad is over here mowing the grass, and it's definitely needed. But let's get into the story. So July 2nd, 1966, three young women, Anne, Renee, and Patricia, went to Indiana Dunes State Park on the southern shore of Lake Michigan. And by that evening, none of them have come home. Renee was 19 and she was married. Patricia, they say she was involved with a married man, but she was single. And Anne, by some accounts, was pregnant. though I don't think that detail was ever confirmed, but there was speculation, right? Their disappearance set off one of the largest searches in the region, and in decades since, it spawned a tangle of competing theories, some thin, some persistent, and none of them have ever been proven. Now, the timing of this one is genuinely a little eerie. So, 11 days after the women vanished, a man named Richard Speck broke into a townhouse in Chicago and murdered 8 student nurses in one night. Now, most of us kind of know this story because we follow serial killers and we love true crime. Others of us may also recognize this story from American Horror. It's an American Horror Story? Yeah, like Murder House. So, like the first season, they covered Richard Speck's story briefly for an episode. Okay, but anyway, now he had actually been dropped off at the dock about 20 miles from Indiana Dunes State Park that summer, and Indiana investigators did formally look into whether or not he could be connected to the disappearance, but there wasn't a timeline to support it. There's no evidence placing Speck at the park, on the water, or anywhere near the women on July 2nd. So authorities ultimately cleared him. And it's just one of those connections that makes sense as a headline, but it falls apart as soon as you start checking the dates. So, what sucks about this is that when the women went missing, it really wasn't reported on. I mean, it was briefly, but as soon as Richard Speck killed all those women, the coverage of these, 3 girls disappearing basically went, they poof, vanished, just like the storyline. There wasn't really any coverage because they were focusing on Richard Speck. So the next theory that comes up, and this is the one that really just is the one that disturbs me the most, because if you think about the time, it was the 60s, and heaven forbid you were an unwed mother. And we all know that this was before Roe v. Wade, and there were illegal abortions happening, back alley abortions. Women were, unfortunately finding themselves in situations where they felt like they had no other choice, right? Okay, so here's the next theory, and it's called the abortion boat theory. Now, I don't know if I'm able or allowed to say that on YouTube, so I'll probably have to bleep that out, but it comes from a reporter. I think he was also like, was he a police officer? I'm not sure, but anyway, the investigator, his name was Dick Wiley. He covered the case for decades, and I believe he grew pretty close to one of the families. His theory was that Patricia and Anne had both become involved. I don't know if they were both involved with a married man, but they were involved, and one or both of the women may have been pregnant. Okay. So at the time, abortion was illegal both in Indiana and in Illinois. And some of Anne's friends later said that she mentioned that she was possibly having to look into a home for unwed mothers shortly before she disappeared. Now, that was a thing back in the 60s. Families would ship off their daughters to homes, and they would tell their friends and family that, yeah, they went to go stay with my dear Aunt Sally, or they went to go stay with cousin blah 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 for 9 months. Crazy how that timeline would match up, but they would ship their daughters off. They would be forced to give their kids up in adoptions, and then they would bring them back home. It's really sad, but anyway, the idea is that the boat that the women boarded that day wasn't a stranger's. It was arranged. It was part of getting them to the procedure that went wrong. Okay, so, and the others got swept up in it and trying to keep them quiet. I don't know why you would bring witnesses to something like that, but like I said, it's a theory, and it's persisted for decades, largely because Wiley himself, he kept pushing it. And after all this time, he was never able to produce any hard evidence connecting any specific person to it. And so it remains unproven. Unfortunately, it's still going to remain unproven because Dick Wiley, he passed away June of this year. Now, jumping into this portion or this theory of the story is, it's wild to me. Not as wild as the abortion boat, but it's still pretty wild because I personally would have never thought about this. So Patricia, she was connected to either the horse racing part of the world or like an equestrian. She had a horse she liked riding horses, right? So according to her sister Janice, Patricia had been acting strangely the day before she vanished, and apparently she had some bruising on her face. So don't know if she was hit, pushed, whatever, but she had bruising. Her sister asked her about it, and she told her that she was in trouble with the or what she called the horse syndicate, aka the mob. So the world that she was involved in had a name attached to it, and his name was Silas Jane. And he ran the Green Tree Stables at the time and was, by reputation, one of the most ruthless operators in the Midwest for horse racing. Um, he had a younger half brother, and his name was George, and he ran a competing, legitimate horse stable. And Silas really didn't care too much too much about that. Because he was, doing things underhandedly and was being pretty shady. Okay, in the months surrounding the girl's disappearance, George's house caught on fire, his horses were beaten, and apparently dynamite was also found planted at his back door before he managed to get away. Now, speculation is that Silas, his half brother, was responsible for all of this, okay? Then in March of 1966, his car exploded with an employee inside who had gone to move it for him. Okay, so that happened at the stable. It raised a pretty uncomfortable question like, were Anne, Renee, and Patricia caught in the middle of the violence? Um, Simply because the girls were there, like I believe it's Patricia and Anne or Patricia and Renee, but another one of the girls also rode at those stables. Okay. So was it because simply Patricia was connected to those who knew too much about the car bombing, or maybe they heard something they should have, or maybe they saw something they shouldn't have? But anyway, so going back to when the girls disappeared from the beach, okay, so they were on the beach. People saw them wade into the water, they saw them get on a boat, and they saw them leave, right? They left behind their personal stuff. So, their blankets, their purses. I believe one of them had some checks in there, like $55 worth of checks. So it looked to like the bystanders and everybody else on the beach that the girls were to come back. Like you're just going to go play in the water for a bit and come back. But they never came back. So the people on the beach later on in that early evening saw their stuff, picked it up, and they took it to one of the state park offices. Okay, they didn't realize it, but at that time, in the personal belongings of the girls, George's phone number was found in their personal belongings, and also Martha, who was Silas Jane's wife. Martha, her phone number was also found. So that's where people were trying to piece this together, that the girls knew a little bit more about George's car bombing than the girls probably themselves even realized. Okay. And then there's another piece of lore that's attached to the case that I'm going to say is unverified simply because I haven't seen any paperwork that ties it to a named sheriff, one particular sheriff. But the story goes is that at some point after the women vanished, Silas Jane told a Porter County sheriff, unidentified, that he had 3 human bodies buried beneath his house. Okay. Supposedly, law enforcement took it seriously enough to plan a search of Silas's property, and supposedly the sheriff involved was killed in a farming accident before the search could happen. So that case or that lead went cold. It's a great story, and it keeps showing up again and again and again, and other like podcasts that I've seen and stuff like that. But I'm just going to be straight with you. I couldn't find a recorded name for that sheriff. So to me, that's kind of like, I don't know, hearsay. It's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. We're just going to say it's a non confirmed fact. Okay. So it doesn't prove anything. Investigators interviewed extensively within the world of the horse syndicate and were never able to make a case stick. In fact, much of the theory traces back to a single book that helped popularize this in the first place. The timing, the violence, and Patricia's own fear in the days before she disappeared is a combination of why, of everything that's out there, that the horse theory is probably the one that I believe the most. Okay. So Anne, Renee, and Patricia were never found. Nobody was ever charged. And 60 years later, the water is still not telling us everything. Just like the primrose that we got on the edge of the pond, some things just don't sit quietly where you can see them. They creep along the edges, spread underneath the surface, and by the time you notice, they've already gone further than you can ever guess. And pulling at a thread doesn't mean you've gotten the whole root system. Okay, guys, thank you so much for joining in this week on Plots and Pots for the Indiana Dunes story, theories, all that good stuff. But next time, we're talking about a man who didn't run. He planned, he executed, and he simply walked away and became someone else entirely different for 18 years. And we're going to find out how that's even possible. So this is Plots and Pots. Stay curious, stay dirty, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.